So thanks all for coming. And I was like saying before, I was like preparing those slides yesterday and a little bit today in the morning, like to finalize the slides. And it kind of like became a journey. So how I end up with this research project, kind of like I call like a research project now, like why I'm studying media at the end of the day. And maybe before reflecting was that I ended up teaching sport broadcasting last year, and I was like, wow, I should like start preparing like new content or like having my own content to expose students to. That's like why I'm also recording, so I can put on YouTube, so they can like watch later. But what I'm gonna say is that maybe I always like had this idea of like looking at media. So I was like expecting maybe like lots of people that didn't knew me here. So I thought like, well, I'm gonna talk about my background in general. So I did my both like the BA and my master's back home in Brazil. So my BA is sports like PE. So I'm a PE teacher trained. And my MPhil was in business marketing. And I was like, yeah, but how this relates to media when I started like reflecting on. And during my BA, my like dissertation, MIS, was on discussing if sport was a public good. And why I wanted to discuss that was because at that time, like in the early 2000s, like beginning of like the late 1990s and early 2000s when I was doing my undergrad, we had like pay TV coming in Brazil. And then lots of the sports moved all the way to pay TV. So is football, for instance, a public good and then should be broadcasted on free-to-air TV? Or is just the national team a public good and then all the national team games should be broadcast on free-to-air TV? So that was my discussion as an undergrad. Is sport a public good or not? So I interview like politicians, media, and fans in general. So a little bit of interest in media at that time. Then I went to do my master's in business, and that led me to research about identity. So I was like interested in understanding identity, so like how people build or like construct their identity with their different goods they have, and with one particular good in mind, which was shoes. So how the different shoes mark your different identities. So I asked like people to take pictures of their shoes and write a biography of the shoe as a person. Like, oh, I got this shoe, like the shoe was born this day, blah, blah, blah. So they tell a story, I went there and interviewed them. So how something that is external to us help us to construct our identity. So like how our identity is mediated. It's not like just us as the body and mind. Like there are other things that contribute to us building our identity. And during the masters, and that was something that came to my mind on the bus coming here to Leeds, was that during the masters in one of the modules we had like to do a research. We had always had to do research, like applied research, like theoretical applied research, collect data. And one of the modules we did a research with machine learning, like neural networks. So it was kind of like early days, early 2000s. So we went to a social media platform. It was Orkut at the time. It wasn't before. It was before Facebook, and we found two communities. So like one was like I hate beer, the other one was like I love beer. So we went there and collect all the information that those individuals had in their profiles. So like if they have friends, how many friends, how many pictures they have, all those things. And then we went to predict if they loved or they hate beer based on what they post or what they had in their profiles. And we managed to get like over 80% correct prediction based on what people post in their profiles, if they love or hate beer. So we kind of like linked to the methods now of this research. And then I came to England to do my PhD at Durham. So how the PhD idea came about was that my brother was living in Switzerland. So like my brother moved to Switzerland early 2000. And my brother was like a huge football fan, and he would follow Internacional, so like the club that we follow in Brazil. And how he did at that time, when there was no official streaming, neither, or like very few, illegal streaming. So what we did would pick the computer, put in front of the TV, Skype him, show the game, and talk. So we watch the game together. And if you go to the theory about fandom, those are not real fans. Like fans that consume through the media, they're not real fans. Like real fans are the ones that attend the game. So by the theory, my brother wouldn't be a real fan, wouldn't be a genuine fan. But what I saw and experienced was completely the opposite. On top of that, when my father did his PhD in Germany in the 80s, early 80s, like before, you have like TV really available the way it is. So the way that he followed football, like football from Brazil, was that my grandfather would send in a box all the newspapers of a 1 month, and he would receive a month later, and he would read about what happened. So that's how he kept in contact with football at that time. So like there was like always in my mind, so how you consume, how you maintain your identity in different spaces. So I went to Durham and went to research cosmopolitanism, or like these identities across the globe, by looking at one club that I picked, was like Liverpool FC, and fans in both Brazil and Switzerland. And I researched them both physically, so I went to games in Switzerland. I went to games in Switzerland to watch on TV with the Swiss fans. I went to games at Anfield. I went to games on pubs in outside Anfield. And I followed them on Facebook. So how they maintain their identities through those different media, especially Facebook. And then the Brazilian ones, especially, it was through Facebook mainly that I spoke to them. So most of like the fandom activities that they did was through the media. It was like either reading newspapers and lots of like local newspapers. So Liverpool Echo was like the newspaper that they had to read, even they were like in Brazil or in Switzerland. They had to read Liverpool Echo because that's the genuine source of news for Liverpool fans. That's the way they saw. And most of their socializations happen through social media. So Facebook, especially like chatting on Facebook or posting on threads and then commenting back. So that was like my PhD. And from this, there were like some publications that came out. So one of the first ones was when I discussed transnational solidarities, so like how they build their solidarities. That's not based on like physically being there. And then how they tried to claim authenticity. So it was about knowledge, it was about caring about others. So those are like the markers of identity and solidarities. It wasn't about being born in Liverpool or like going to the games all the time. Then I went to discuss the idea of the cosmopolitan flaneur. So how they were like in that space, which is kind of like we see as a known space, the internet, but that it was like a real place for them, where they congregate, they come together, they talk, they create friendships, and so on and so forth. So that's the second paper. Then there was like this book chapter where I discussed this idea of like being for a chosen order. So they had the option to choose to support Liverpool. They were not born into that, but at the same time they make their choice. They got in obligations, so they had to follow all the time. So they had to read all the time. They had to discuss. So they have like this degree of freedom to choose what they want to do or who they want to follow. But then after they make their choice, they kind of like become obliged to follow those rules. And that leads like to the last paper that I'm finishing writing, and then I'm borrowing from this part of sociology that studies family, which there's like this new family composition, which is living apart together. So families, like couple, kids, but they don't live together. So they are together but apart physically. They're together metaphysically but apart. And that's more or less what I saw with those fans. So like they are apart, physically apart, each one in their own houses by themselves, but connected on social media, talking all the time. So they are together. But at the same time, we see like the opposite, which is together but apart. So they are physically together, but they are not interacting with the person next to them. So they go to Anfield to watch the game, And I thought, like, wow, that would be the experience I'll be with all the Swiss fans. But actually, we were like all small groups. We just met once to go for a dinner. And then the rest of the time, they were like spread around. So we are together, but apart. So that's like the last paper that I'm writing. So that's kind of like how I end up now discussing media in general. So like how to be media and identity. So the introduction to today's research here comes from this notion that sport and media, they are in this intertwined relationship that's very strong. It's like symbiotic. So like one relies on the other. So sport is what it is today because of the media. And most likely the media, or mass media especially, is what it is today is because of sport. Sport as the content, as a conduit to media. So we have like lots of examples. Let's say Sky, when they launched, they use football to drive sales. And then we can see BT with like the Champions League, Amazon Prime now, with like some of the Premier League games. So one relies kind of on the other one to exist in the way they exist today. There is, for me, this idea that media becomes even more important now. Not that they were less important before, but it becomes like even more important in the sense that we live in both real and mediated worlds. So maybe in the past people think like, oh, social media, that's like second life. So that's not real world. But now probably the first thing that we do when we wake up in the morning, we pick our phones and we get informed about the world through WhatsApp, what our friends say. So we are living there on that phone, but we are also living here. So maybe there's like this extra degree on globalization and ways of being that social media fools. And then I'm borrowing like this idea from Niklas Luhmann, where he says that if you want to understand, or like, not really this, but the way we understand the words, or the way that we perceive the world, we do it through mass media. So we learn the word or what's going on about through mass media. And I'm kind of like inverting the order, saying by, if I want to understand the word, then I would understand this word via media. So what media says is actually what's happening. And what media doesn't say is actually not happening. So like the patterns of representations create the reality that we live in. So what we accept as the normal, the norm, what we play, what we do, what we discuss, and what we don't discuss. So I'm kind of like inverting the order from Luhmann's arguments. So again, like the relationship between sport and media and why they are one so important to the other one. So we can like claim, or like according to the authors, we can claim that sport is physical, like it's predominantly physical. There's like two teams or like two athletes competing against each other. So they are there, it's happening. Maybe there's like an argument that you're going to say, well, esports might be different, that's now completely mediated, but we still have the events, like people go there, stuff like this. And on the other hand, we have media, which is the symbolic. So we have like the two extremes needing one another to exist or coexist. So sport gives the physical element to media, and media gives the symbolic element to sport. So they self-reinforce. Both are like part and parcel of those invented traditions from the late 1800s, early 1900s, especially here in the British Isles. So like sports that we play today, most were invented here. And the way we understand media was created at the same time. So like the propaganda type of media, the ad type of media, where the profits, they don't come from selling the newspaper, but they come from selling ads on those newspapers. So you sell for a loss, but you make the profit through the ads. So you need content. You need content that drives people into buying your media. And what's the best content, or like one of the best content, is sport. Because there are like some characteristics to sport that provides this power to the media. So sport attracts large crowds, is cheap to produce, and there was like a point that Brain Law, when he gave like the talk yesterday for the sport broadcasting students, he mentioned, like he had like over 20 years experience in Sky, like saying how cheap it is to produce and how much time you can fill with one game of 90 minutes. You can like talk for 3-4 hours about one game that's 90 minutes, and probably you cannot do with other types of content. So easily translatable, involves drama, real people, and then you can see like how media nowadays have like so many of those shows that are like reality shows that try to mimic this aspect of sport with like real people, real drama. They are there, they're suffering, they go and play, and they cry when they win, they cry when they lose. So they're not like faking those emotions. Like people want to see the emotions, they want to see the drama, and sport provides everything. They're like villains, heroes, they create all those narratives. There's like US versus Soviet Union, and then it's Brazil against Argentina, and then you have all those rivalries that are like reinforced through the media. And maybe here that links to my research more is like the ideologies. So what kind of ideologies we can see from what is reporting and what's not reported on the media. So what have I done? So getting like this notion that socializations, they happen more like, or like they happen at the same time, both metaphysical and physical. So we are living both worlds, or like there's just one world nowadays. This ends by leaving like lots of digital footprints, and then creates, I would say, huge problems to empirical sociologists. So how we can make sense of this mass amount of data. So Maris argued that if you think like this digital world that lives those digital footprints, there are like three interconnected aspects to this new practice to sociology. So one is like looking for new context of research. Maybe what I'm doing is not that new, like doing like content analysis, but like trying to do a content analysis with like big data might be something new as a context. Two, using like new methods. I could have classified myself to 64,000 news, but it's gonna take me ages to do that. So like using like machine learning, using the computer power to process everything for me is just a new way of doing it. Of course, like collecting the news, like another way of doing, like collecting manually would be like taking ages. And the third one was engaging with public. So maybe the idea of like recording and putting on YouTube the lecture or like the talk is the third one. So what I did, and I'm still doing, so I haven't finished, it's just there. So there's this website, an app, let's call it this, that's called if this then that. So you create a parameter, if this happens, then that happens. So that's this analysis just for that time period, so like 4 months, if I'm not mistaken. So what were the parameters? I found the RSS feed. So like every time a newspaper or like a news outlet put a news out, they send through their RSS feed, which you can use to read those news. Then you receive like the notification. So with on if this then that, if there's a new news item on the RSS feed, then that add a line on a Google spreadsheet. So that's what if this and that did for me. I'm here using just a few of the ones that I'm collecting, and was especially because I was preparing this for the other event, and those were like the easiest ones to reach the results that I found. So here I'm collecting from ESPN, from the US, Gazzetta dello Sport in Italy, Ole in Argentina, Mark in Spain, they keep in France, and 5 in the UK, so like BBC Sport, Daily Mail, Daily Mirror, Independent, and Guardian. So like all those here are from the sport feed, it's not from the news feed, so I could have like received something different. Maybe like why esports doesn't feature heavily, and when I talk about the results on those ones, is that what I perceived or like I saw, is that esports doesn't feature in the sports section. They tend to feature in other sections, technology. Different from different outlets. So it's kind of like maybe a limitation or maybe like something to look at in the future. So 64,000 news that I have, well, if this and that collected for me. I just create that. So that's like how it looks. You create like the applet, so those are like applets that are like still running. So I'm collecting like Sport Illustrated. I haven't analyzed the data, I haven't even downloaded the Google spreadsheet, and I have like probably over 30,000 at the moment just for the Sport Illustrated that are there, sitting there to be analyzed. And then hopefully you're going to collect until 1 year, and then that will become the paper 1 year of use, not like 4 months. So this is an example that I just took like yesterday. So shows that Beckett ran. So there was like the news about the game in Bulgaria, and so just like shows that I collected this and it added to the Google spreadsheet. What the Google spreadsheet looks like this. So you can like set the parameters what you want to collect or not. So what I collect is the date, which creates like a problem because the date, not only the day and the month, but it gets like the hour and the seconds. So like when you analyze on Tableau, it creates like multiple entries, like every second is like a different entry. So like if I want to do a timeline analysis, I need to condense every single day in 1 day, like take ages. So then the short title, the long description, like where the news come from, so BBC Sport, like the link to the BBC Sport. But the most important one is this one for me, at least, because that was the one that I used to analyze. So you can see that's like the link. If you go low to the top there, you can see like bbc.co.uk, sport, rugby union. So it tells me there that is a rugby union news. I tried in the first instance to analyze with the short title or the long title, to do like the machine learning algorithm with what is written. Can it predict what sport it is? But like the prediction was like really, I wouldn't say bad, but it wasn't good. It wasn't what I was expecting to use. So maybe like I'm bypassing this and using the URL. Doesn't make a difference. It's like an easier way to predict what it is. It still like creates errors, but very few errors compared to the other ones. Maybe there's an explanation. If you go like to media studies, they say that the news are so similar across that you cannot differentiate what they are talking about. They just like put the news out. They use the same words all the time to describe the same events. So that's maybe why the computer cannot understand what's going on here if I use the long or the short description to the title. Because they talk in the same way. So that someone won, someone lost, that was the score, and it's hard for the computer to understand what's going on. Maybe like with a huge data set, it can, or like a more robust analysis. So, collected all those news, downloaded all those Excel, condensed the UK one, condensed the Spanish one, so like Marca and the Argentina one, like the Spanish language ones. ESPN I did separately because in the US they call soccer instead of football, and then if I put them together, the computer will get completely lost because one is soccer, one is football, and like what's American football, what's football. So yeah. So I use RapidMiner. So RapidMiner, I'm gonna show like some of the screens. RapidMiner is like a machine learning tool. Like they have like the free trial for like free account for academics that you can all use, and it's quite simple to use. I would say rather than using R or other package that you need like properly code. This one is kind of more direct in boxes and drag and drop things. You just need to know what you drag and drop. That's the hardest part. So what I did, I create like those models with 3 algorithms that are used for classification. So Naive Bayes, deep learning, which is like neural networks, and approximation one, K, and N. And I tried with all the three to see which one gave me the best results. So like the neural networks, even that we think, well, the name is like very pompous, and I'm like, oh, that would be the best one. But one is the one that takes more time to run because it tries all the different neural connections that it creates. So it takes like 10 minutes to run the model, depending on the data set, the large of the data set. And it doesn't give me good results based on a comparison with the other ones, which run in less than 1 minute. The same thing, the same data set. So I had a training sample of just 3,000, well, almost 3,100 news that I classify myself. So I went there, Excel, well, that's tennis, that's this, that's that, that's this. So I had like to do manually for just 3,000 news, which is like 4.8% of my total overall news that I had. One problem that, well, I started realizing that with 500, roughly 500 news per outlet, I could run a model and could get a good result. So I was like doing like 500. But then I would find different categories there, like climbing. Like either I remove these and assume that it didn't exist climbing on the L'Equipe, or I go to the Excel, find lots of climbings, and add to my data set, training data set. So that's what I did. So like I started with 500 and I start adding more. So like, oh, there's lots of volleyball here, so I need to put like volleyball. It came from my random sample, so I need to assume that it exists, volleyball. So that's why at the end of the day, with L'Equipe, I had like 29 different sports. And then the other ones, they're like roughly 16, 17. Like talking to the CEO, like via Twitter of RapidMiner, he was like quite impressed that I could get like that good results with lots of categories. They normally use for sentiment analysis, like 3 sentiments, positive, negative, neutral, or like predicting sales, buy or not buy, so like 2 categories. And I was like doing with like 16, 17, 29 categories. So like that's like the result. So like this one, for instance, I got like 92% accuracy. So it predicts the model, so I can apply that model to my whole data set from Gazette dello Sport. So when I get right 92% of the time, it's quite good. So this is like what I did. So that's like how it looks like. I get my Excel file, I put Excel here. The first thing is like generate an ID. So it generates an ID, like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to each one of the news, and then writes a new Excel file. So now I have like a second Excel file, which I then input the second one with the ID, and then generate a sample. So a stratified sample, like random sampling, it just like picks. I can like select, it's like relative, like 10% of my whole population, or I can put like a number what I want. So I normally put like 500. That's what I was doing, and it was working. And then it creates a new Excel file. So now I have like the third one. You know, I keep like creating new Excel files all the time. Then here's like the first model. So like how I train the model. I get that sample, which I manually coded already. So now I have like the fourth file with like sample coded. So I added there. I tell that one of the columns is the one that's like they're gonna analyze. So that's like that URL. It's like nominal to text. Then I process the document, which I'm gonna show in a bit. Then I select the attribute. So what it is like a classification, and which one is the classification to kind of like the outcome, like the one that I did. And it runs the model, validates, and gives me the performance. And if it's good, it's good. If it's not good, it's not good. So how it looks inside that process documents. So one is like transform everything like to lower cases because it gets different. So that was like kind of frustrating when you create a categories. Sometimes you put rugby with capital R. So like lowercase r, and then it becomes 2 categories, and both are rugby. So you need like to put everything lowercase or everything like capital. Then you replace some tokens, tokenize every single word there. filter some of the words. So let's say if you have like a text and you have like and, at, those stop words, it's just like filters, taking them out. And then you can like filter as well by the length. Let's say it's an A. You have like there in that sentence, you like remove that A because it doesn't make any sense. You can like statement as well, which you go to the roots. So like say it's footballer, then football, they become all the same thing. They're all the same root. So there's like lots of like things that you can throw here to clean that URL or like the text you have. Then you have the models, like the three algorithms that I tested, and then I did like this to each one. So you kind of like connect those lines. So which one you want to be on and the one you want to be off, and you run the performance, you apply the model, and you check. So like here it's kind of like I divide my coded sample in multiple subsamples and try an error. So like, okay, this one I don't know, or like it knows. This one is the one that I know, and try this multiple times and see how many times it gets right. So that's how the models work. It creates like subsamples every single time. But I don't see this, it just like runs in the background. And I get. So okay, I did the sample, I trained, I have like now the sample model, which I put here on the sample model on the top, and then here I put like all the population. And then I ask it to apply the model to the population, and you're gonna apply what it learned, which like 92%, if it says something like this, you're gonna be that. So that's how it does. Then it writes to Excel, and then it becomes like a huge Excel file, because it creates a 1 and 0 to every single word that it has in the whole population. So let's say if there's like football, and there's like rugby, and there's like multiple words I can have on that URL, it's gonna be, each one is gonna be a column on my Excel file, and it'll be 1 and 0s. Did it appear? Did it not appear? Did it appear? Did it not appear? And there's like, becomes, it's just like a massive. And I don't need to see this, but it has to do this. Like the file becomes massive. Sometimes Excel crashes, it doesn't open because it's too big. It's like very frustrating. But at the end of the day, you just want the predictive category, because that's the only thing I want to put on Tableau. So it's like just an example of the result. So it shows like what it predicted. So that, the first one was tennis. That's from ESPN. So how many times it predicted tennis when it was tennis? So like on the top, like true tennis, and how many times it predicted tennis. So true basketball, how many times it predicted basketball. And you can see the class prediction and like recollection or something like this, the name. So you can see like for each one of the models you try. And of course, you start seeing, well, this one I got like just 22%. It's like an other category. So I couldn't find where to put those, or like create other, because then I put everything there as other. But it gets like really bad results. So that's how I always like added more things to my training set. When I saw that, well, this one's like just 65%, for instance, so I need to train more gymnastic. So I went there, found more gymnastic to the sample, so we got like a better result. So I was like trying like always improve the model. So that's like the results, going to the results now. So this is like all aggregated UK sources. So like Daily Mail, or Daily Telegraph, well, I can't remember like the names now. So vast majority, I don't know if you can see like from there, is football. So predominantly football. We have tennis, most likely, and I'm going to talk individually for each news outlet, because of BBC, and most likely because of Wimbledon, because it was at that period, and BBC broadcast Wimbledon, so they have a reason to talk about tennis. But it's quite interesting, the ones that appear and the ones that don't appear. So you don't see like much volleyball here. There's like, well, at least no volleyball at all. We have like even snooker. We have like a little bit of MMA. We have a little bit of basketball, cycling, golf, horse racing features a lot. in the UK news. Car racing, I think like it's quite not really car racing, but it's motor racing in general. So I put like car racing, but it should have been motor racing. Rugby here, again, that's like both league and union, because it was hard for the model to understand that's either league or union, so I put like them together. So lots of the things that I had to aggregate them, because it makes it easier for the model to learn. But what's interesting is the ones by publication. So if you go to the Mail, like 78% is football. Almost everything they write is about football. It's like non-stop football. I haven't shown here like about gender. I have like on the blog like gender relations, and it was like 13% of the news are on women's sports. But if it's football, like probably it's like 95% is men's sports. Then we have like tennis, cricket, like boxing. So like that's the list from the most cover to the least cover one. So we still have like gymnastics there. One thing that I started like looking at was maybe it's like the readership and what they assume to be the readership and class composition, what those different classes would like to play or read about, or maybe what I'm going to talk later, like my discussions, like who is influencing who. Is that the readership that is asking for that, or is like them saying that, well, you need to like boxing because that's your type of sport. So the mirror is a good example. Boxing goes all the way to the second place. So if you go to the Guardian, which I'm going to show later, boxing goes like to the 8th or 9th place. So there's like maybe a class relation in those two publications. So again, we're like very similar to the other one on what sports they cover and what not. So independent, again, massively on football, over 70%. Then we have tennis, we have golf there, cycling, cricket. So the Guardian, the one I was mentioning, so football like goes to 58%, so like a little bit like less. Cricket takes like a large part of the publications, and tennis goes to 3rd place or like 4th place, just next to rugby, which probably, if I did manage to like union and league, might be more union than league. But boxing is like all the way down. And then we have like the BBC, which kind of like more like diverse, and we have just 38% football, and tennis takes more prominence, and probably, as I said, relates to BBC covering live Wimbledon. So they have like an interest in putting on the news there, so like people read and go like to the TV and watch. So there's like this cozy relationship on what they write and what they want to write about. So that's like the UK. So if you go to Argentina, 87% is football. It's like almost everything is football. You got a little bit of car racing, so F1 a little bit, and rally. And then tennis, there's like still a little bit of rugby. What's interesting, they had like some news on fitness, so how to get fit, so like tips and stuff like this. It was like interesting to see a different form of like news that we don't get in the English newspapers here, or like the British newspapers. We're like focused on competitive sport, like ours competitive sport. So that's one of the points that I'm discussing. If I can finish in time. Gazzetta dello Sport in Italy, 80% football. Like I've just like highlight what I found interesting, gossip. So like one of the big things that on Gazzetta dello Sport was gossip news. So what the footballers' wives are doing, what they're doing in the spare time, where they're traveling. Lots of the gossip are on football, but there's still gossip. I was like, wow, that's not news. Like, where should I put it? I'm like, I'm gonna create a category. It's gossip. So it became gossip. So like lots of gossip news on Gazzetta dello Sport. They're like created drama, real people, they have like real lives. Spain, we have like football again dominating, like football like dominates across apart from ESPN, as you're gonna see. What was interesting to see esports featuring on the Spanish newspaper there, and we had like some Paralympic news as well, and some outdoors, which was quite nice because on the French one we have like lots of outdoors news, and then of course that's like a merged category that I put sports that are taking place outside, which like football is taking place outside as well, but let's say skiing, climbing. Instead of like creating those different categories, it would be hard for the model to learn. I put all of them as outside sports or like outdoor sports. So that's like L'Equipe in France. You can see like there's like lots of things that they cover, lots of different activities. Still like football like go close to 50%, but we have like a very diverse other 50. And we have like handball, we have like volleyball, we had like judo. I had like to create a category for judo because like fighting. Yes, they were there, and then like esports. Yeah, lots of like cycling because of the Tour de France and the Giro d'Italia. It was like featuring the Gazette of the Sport as well. And I think that's the last one, ESPN. Again, like college is an aggregated category, so there are volleyball college, American football college, basketball college, so they're all there. It was easier to create like this. But this most likely reflect that time period that I collect the data, because that was like holiday season for American football. Most likely American football now that the season started, it's gonna be like over. So that's why I would like to do like a whole year project and see what 1 year shows, and then maybe the fluctuation if I can aggregate those dates in an easier way rather than do manually. It's gonna take ages. So this is like the data. So what were the points that I kind of like tried to explain what I saw? So there's like a clear predominance of one sport, and it was like football. So like football was across the board apart ESPN. But even then, on ESPN, we had like sports with like 30% and others with 1% or even like 0%, of course, because they don't show that. But those distribution patterns are depending on the media. So like media like focus on different readers, but also depending on the region. So like different countries, they have different sports being covered. Well, why that? I don't know, like, isn't sport global or is sport local? So that's like a question that you can ask. That's like the pattern of distribution. So that's what I call like the sport national cultural bias. So in Brazil, football is the cultural sport. Here, probably football because that's what's being covered. So like it creates a bias. We are born into this bias of believing those are the sports that we can play or watch because they are the ones being broadcasted or like talked about. And this is like very similar to what Foucault called the episteme. So like the way that like the community understands the topic, like the news or whatever. Like Foucault was more interested in scientific publications, but it can be applied to news. And this episteme or like these patterns like perpetuated by the reproduction of news, because in 4 months I have like 64,000 news. So news, they come and come and come and come and come, and then there are like so many that you're inundated with news. There is like a sense of managed community that we are consuming that kind of sport because those are the sports showing on that media or like on overall those media available in our country. And for me, it does communicate some ideologies behind like why football. And of course, if you go to gender, like why is men's football? Or like why is men's sport in general? And if you go to the British media, why is competitive sport? Why they are not talking about just for fun sports? It's sport. So they could like be talking about fitness or like being healthy, but they're focused on competitive sport all the time. So there's like an ideology behind. And this bias for me is like the expression, or like the ultimate expression of the communication for both media and sport, because of this repetition. So like they repeat. So the content becomes like, for me, like becomes hostage to the medium. So it relies on the medium, like needs the medium. And the message is like irrelevant. It doesn't matter because it's just repetition. It's football. It doesn't matter what's going on. It's football. So there's one hegemonic way of consuming sport is by consuming football. And assuming that everyone loves football. There's this assumption by the media that everyone loves football, that's why we're going to put football out. Or maybe because they want football to be there. This might relate to the idea of pseudo events, in the sense that those events, those sports, they don't exist in itself, they exist because of the media. So the media creates those events. And it was like quite interesting that Brain said this yesterday when he was working in Sky. So Sky asked them to talk about products that Sky had as rights. Like other sports, they don't need to talk. They talk about the Premier League because the Premier League they had. And they always had to build up the hype. And then if you go like to BT Sports and watch them like broadcasting MMA, it's always the best fight. It's always like, that's the best like ground and pounder ever to be on that fight. It's always the best. So they have to create those events. And maybe like this repetition with one hegemonic form kind of like crystallize one way of consuming sport. And for me, what is sport becomes that competitive nature of sport. Why they're not talking of the types of sport. Let's say outdoor activities, climbing, you can climb without competitive climbing. So like why they're not being covered, like those pastimes. Let's go pastimes or sport, whatever we want to call them. So those are like kind of like my conclusions. So the relationship between sport and media becomes like stronger, like one relies on the other one to exist, one creates the other one, the conditions for the other one. There's this notion of sport, competitive sport, being the dominant form. That's what I found on the media. They crystallize this one way of consuming sport. And what sport we should consume is the national cultural bias. That we can be added to those 5 editorial filters that Herman and Chomsky discussed to the propaganda model of media, how media operates, how they construct the news, what news they talked about. So like more questions to think for the future, like can I find other patterns? Or like do patterns change over time? If I get other countries, would I find different things? Is that just because I focus on Western countries and language that I could speak? So I found this. What about other media outlets, more alternative media outlets? I got like really like the powerful media around the globe. What about gender? So I could have classified about gender. Most of those news, they are kind of like tagged in the sense that when it's women's sport, it says women's sport. When it's men's sport, it doesn't say men's sport, it just says sports. So probably the model can learn very fast that what is sport is just men's sport, and when it's women's sport, they say women's sport. So I can see like across the whole data set what is the percentage of women's sport being covered. But what I did with the BBC, just for one of the blog posts, was like 13%. What happens if I collect longer, or maybe if I can use a larger training set, or like get lots of people to categorize, like thousands and thousands of news, get lots of the categories out, not try to condense them in rugby, both league and union, and see like what is actually happening. Because this is like kind of an overview, like very simple overview of what's going on. Because I had like to make it simpler for the model, for the time that I had as well. So yeah, so that's me then. My emoji. Thank you.